I'm Robert Barwick. I'm the research director of an Australian political party called the Citizens Party, and I've been a full-time employee of my party for 32 years. And our party is a party that's committed to economic development policies for Australia and independence on the world stage. And by independence, I mean independent from the United States and the United Kingdom.
Thank you very much. And this interview will focus on recent hot topics, including Trump's reciprocal tariff and also China-Australia relations. So let's get started. So, firstly, the US recently announced a reciprocal tariff policy, but subsequently made frequent policy changes, such as granting a 90-day tariff pause for over 75 economies. What do you think is the root cause for such policy shifts? And is there any deeper strategic intention behind these changes?
I think there might be a an unintended consequence root cause, which is Trump did not know what he was getting himself into. But I do think there is a deeper agenda, but there are conflicting interests in the White House that are trying to persuade Trump to their view. And it's not quite clear what his view is yet. But when I say unintended consequence, it seems to me, Zoe, that Donald Trump has this idea that America should be the leading economy in the world. And because America lost a lot of industries, especially manufacturing, in his view, to China, he makes the mistake of blaming China for that, as if China came and stole them, when that is not what happened at all. They were outsourced by American companies to China to do the manufacturing in China. And in the subsequent 40 years or so, America has not invested in those areas that used to be the manufacturing center of the American economy. And so that's why it's referred to as the Rust Belt. It is literally rusting away. And he is mistaken, Donald Trump is mistaken if he believes that he can wave tariffs like a magic wand and all that manufacturing will magically come back again. Um, he is, by raising tariffs as high as he has, he was inflicting a lot of pain on his own people that would have been pain that lasted a long time because raising the prices of everything. There are people in the White House who represent a very extreme anti-China point of view, who have long advocated for a total economic decoupling of the United States from China, and almost like going back to the old Cold War divide between the Soviet Union and the United States, where the two economic blocks did not mix. And there are people in the White House actually advocating for that because that's the only way they can see that they know they can't beat China, so they're trying to lock China out of a big chunk of the world economy. Hopefully, they don't win the day, but at the moment they're quite influential, and one of them is this trade advisor named Peter Navarro, who is an extreme xenophobe. He makes up lies about China all the time. He's been caught out at it. He's actually a fraudster, yet he has Donald Trump's ear on trade.
Thank you. And economic and trade cooperation between China and Australia has always been strong. And since 2009, China has been Australia's largest trading partner, export market, and source of imports for 15 consecutive years. So, in your opinion, how will this round of US tariff wars impact China and Australia trade? And which industries are likely to be hit the hardest?
Well, it's unclear to me because what I have confidence in China for is that China doesn't leave anything to chance or to the free market just to adapt. China will always have a contingency plan. Australian exports to China, which are inputs to Chinese manufacturing, could be impacted in a bad way. So the big exports are iron ore, which is the biggest, which goes into steel production. That goes into the infrastructure of production in China. Coal, which goes into steel production and energy, um, that's also part of manufacturing. They're the big ones. A lot of the other exports tend to be foodstuffs, so they're consumed in China, mostly consumed in China. So I think that won't necessarily be a problem unless China's national wealth dropped suddenly, and China wouldn't be able to afford those kinds of inputs. But the big ones would be the exports that are inputs into manufacturing. That would be of a great concern for us because so much of our economy is dependent on those exports. And can I say, um, this week I've just returned to Melbourne, where I live here in the southern part of Australia, from Tasmania. Tasmania is a beautiful little state, island state with a very clean and green image, and it produces very clean, pure products that are very popular among people who know about them. Tasmanian cherries and things like that are very popular. Tasmanian lobster, and I attended the on Monday. I attended the relaunch of the Tasmanian branch of the Australia China Business Council, and you had all these different people there representing export companies in different types of exports, including lobster and cherries and wood and other things. And it's very clear that they are very happy that they have a market like China, and they do not want to lose that market. It is the most important market to them by a long way, not a little way, a long way. The lobster exporter who was present at the meeting said his top 10 markets are all Chinese cities. And then the 11th is Australia. So so that's an example of how important the Chinese market is. And hopefully, because that most that is consumed in China, that won't be as affected as much.
So, in your opinion, how should Australia balance its trade interest between the US and China?
Well, I think Australia has to be honest with itself, and we need our national politics should reflect the meeting that I attended on Monday. Clearly, our trade relationship in with China is the single most important part of our economy. And if we were acting in our independent national interest, we would prioritize that above our relationship with the United States. So there's a little bit of chest beating by the Prime Minister against the Americans, against Donald Trump, because it would look bad if he didn't. And he wants to get re-elected, and so he's just doing a bit of mild chest beating and being critical of the United States, and these tariffs imposed on Australia. However, it's all for show because as soon as the election's over, he and the opposition party will go back to being very to being yes men to the Trump administration. And an example of that, Zoe, is the port of Darwin in the north of Australia was leased by a Chinese company called Landbridge. And 2 weeks ago, the both parties suddenly came up with a policy to cancel that lease and take it back away from them. And it turns out the reason they did that is because the Americans said they wanted us to. So I argue that what's in Australia's interest is look at where our trade lies. Um, Look at the fact that China is a friend to Australia and is not a threat in any way, and prioritize that over the relationship with the United States until the United States wises up to itself.
Thank you, Roby, for sharing with us your insights of Trump's tariff policies. So here are also some questions about national security. So in 2023, Hong Kong fugitive Ted Hui was formally admitted as a lawyer in Australia. Previously, he was convicted of 4 counts of contempt of court and was placed on Hong Kong police's wanted list. And on December last year, HKSAR revoked the passports of 7 fugitives wanted on national security charges, including Hui. Why then is he still able to obtain a lawyer's license in Australia and continue destroying Hong Kong's social stability to this day?
Well, I think there's a couple of issues there. Um, the Ted Hui case is just another example of how Australia has assumptions when it comes to everything to do with China and Hong Kong. And at the essence, the base of those assumptions is we believe that we have a superior system, and that the Australian political and legal system is superior to the Chinese political and legal system. And we decry the fact that Hong Kong used to be British like us and is now back in Chinese under Chinese control again, even though I know that Hong Kong still retains a very healthy British legal tradition. And you've got very eminent people in the Hong Kong legal system, like Granville Cross, the former chief prosecutor, who writes articles explaining the changes in the Hong Kong system. Nevertheless, we assume, well, we in the British tradition have a superior legal tradition system, and therefore um, uh, we claim that Hong Kong has lost its rights, its legal rights, and we are giving someone like Ted Hui back his legal rights. However, that's just one part of it. The other part of it is, unfortunately, we allow ourselves as a country to be used for foreign interference in countries like China. Can I? If I let me end by making a contrast here. Um, Ted Hui was involved in the troubles in Hong Kong in 2019, which were being instigated from outside of Hong Kong by the United States, which were incredibly damaging, um, very destructive to the city. We are holding him up as some kind of a celebrity for being involved in that. We're saying China or Hong Kong has no right to try and charge him for his involvement in that. We have a case here in Melbourne where there is an Australian Vietnamese Chinese man, Sonny Duong, who has been in jail for 1 year because he donated $45,000 to a children's hospital during COVID. That's all he did. But that was called foreign interference, and we jailed him. Now, by any measure, what Ted Hui did was part of a foreign interference operation in Hong Kong, much more serious than what this man did. Yet we treat someone like him like that, and we claim that Ted Hui is right to do what he did in Hong Kong, and that's wrong.
Thank you. And you've mentioned another case, and here I've learned about the case of Dan Dugen. He's an Australian citizen now, but previously he was a former US military pilot and was accused of training Chinese pilots and was arrested in Australia in October 2022. So, during this period, Dugan was not charged with any crimes in Australia, but was still imprisoned while awaiting extradition. Why must he be detained while awaiting extradition to the US for trial?
There is absolutely no need for him to be detained. He's now been in prison for 900 days. He's got a wife and 6 children. 3 of the children are very young. He's broken no Australian laws. He's an Australian citizen, has broken no Australian laws, has been in jail for 900 days for no reason. He could be at home under some kind of a travel ban, or even have a bracelet on his leg that you can give to prisoners sometimes so they can't escape. He could be treated humanely. Instead, they've treated him in the most cruel way they can imagine. And in my view, Zoe, this is clearly intended to make an example of him. And one of the ways that the Americans work is they take advantage of people's good nature. And when people see someone like Dan Dugan being in prison for this long, human nature says, "Oh, he must have done something bad." And America specializes in that kind of approach. They extort pleas out of people through this kind of cruelty. In this case, Australia is doing their dirty work for them, and it is completely wrong, and which is why I advocate on Dan Duggan's behalf.
So, in your opinion, do you think it is a double standard that Australian government has adopted for treating in Australia citizens and Hong Kong fugitives?
It's very much a double standard. we are hypocrites. We're not the only country that's hypocritical, but we excel at our hypocrisy. And it would be one thing if we did it because we wanted to get away. We just wanted our own way on the world stage ourselves, but we don't. Our hypocrisy is usually on behalf of the United States, of a foreign government. We do not act independently in this country, and that's what I think is the great shame, which I'm trying to change because, and not just me. There's a growing movement for Australia to become more independent. The other thing that they're particularly doing though with Dan Duggan is they're sending a warning, and this goes back to your very first question. It's a warning to anyone who does business in China from Australia. You run the risk of falling afoul of the Americans, and anything could happen to you. And I know lots of people are now nervous because of what's happened to Dan Duggan. That's just a motivation that is completely unfair, but it's there, and the people behind it, they don't care that they look like hypocrites. Well, if it makes people afraid of doing business with China, then it undermines it. See, for Australia-China relations are strengthened if there's a lot of individual interaction, business interactions between the two countries. China has done something really wonderful, which is allowing 30-day visa-free travel. And I'm encouraging people, everyone I have an argument with about China, I say, go and visit, right? Don't argue with me, go and visit. And because that kind of actual experience at a person-to-person level is really valuable. If you only can depend on the diplomats and government officials, they can still maintain a form of a relationship, but it won't be as strong. And the people that are treating Dan Duggan like this, I know that that's part of their intention. In 2020, there was a British think tank called the Henry Jackson Society that actually put out a demand saying the Western world and countries like Australia should decouple from China, just totally break economic ties. That just proves there's people that want that, right? And those people are our adversaries. They're the ones that I'm trying to combat with my advocacy for the relationship. And Dan Duggan is a victim of their way of thinking.